My VP operations dismissed me on my 50th birthday to prove his power, so I shifted their $2.3 billion deal. Imagine turning 50, a milestone, a day you expect a happy birthday. Instead, I got fired. Not just fired, but erased by a smug 38-year-old VP who thought I was legacy weight. What he didn't realize, I built the entire damn building he was standing in, brick by digital brick, and on my 50th birthday, he handed me the match to burn it all down. My name is Kenza R.A. For over 2 decades, I was the senior architect of Aldrin's Contract Intelligence Division. 2 decades. I designed the Atlas Framework, a system that processed, secured, and verified global infrastructure contracts for cities across 5 continents. My code. I outlasted 4 CEOs, 3 restructuring waves, and every buzzword Silicon Valley could throw at us. I wasn't flashy. I wasn't political. I was precise and deeply, fiercely loyal. Maybe that was my real mistake. 2 months before my big 5-0, Aldrin hired Damon Thorne, 38, Harvard MBA, a man with a perpetually imperfect smile and a vocabulary made entirely of startup cliches. Disruption, velocity, sunset legacy systems. I was one of those systems. He never said it outright, but in meetings he'd rephrase everything I said like he was translating from a dead language. He called me institutional memory with a smirk, as if I were a dusty filing cabinet left too long in the hallway. What he didn't understand was that the systems he wanted to modernize were the very backbone of the $2.3 billion Boston deal we were finalizing. The system he was trying to sideline was the one keeping the entire company standing. The email arrived at 8:46 a.m. I remember blinking at the monitor, wondering if it was a mistake. Surely it was for the wrong Kenza, or a scheduled system test. I refreshed my inbox twice, then 3 times. My access was gone, and in that sterile, frozen moment, I realized this wasn't a mistake. They had planned it, planned to let me go on the day I turned 50. The most insulting part? The email wasn't even from the CEO. It came from Acting VP Operations Transition Team, a nebulous title no one had ever mentioned before. He hadn't even been officially appointed, which, legally, meant the termination wasn't valid. But I didn't know that yet. At 8:46 a.m., all I knew was that I was 50, locked out of my life's work, and no one had even had the decency to say goodbye. My apartment was silent. Not the good kind of quiet. The kind where it feels like everything's been muted. Like someone turned down the volume on your entire life. I sat at my kitchen table, still in the navy blazer I'd worn for what I thought would be a normal Tuesday. My phone sat next to my coffee mug untouched. No calls. No texts. No pings from Aldrin Tech. Just silence. I glanced at the time, not from habit but instinct. And that's when my eyes caught the watch on my wrist. A silver-faced Seiko, slightly scuffed, worn leather band, and the faintest engraving on the back. To Mom, you build futures. My daughter, Maya, gave it to me 5 years ago, the year I won Executive of the Year. She was 13, nervous in a sea of business suits. I remember how proud she looked when I walked on stage. She made me promise to wear it every day. And I had. Through every product launch, system overhaul, sleepless deadline. It ticked with me like a second pulse. Now it ticked in the stillness. Not a single happy birthday message. Not even from HR's automated bot. Only one text had come through. Heard you're finally retiring. Congrats, Kay. From a junior developer I'd mentored 2 years ago. He meant well, I'm sure. But retiring? That's what they called this. They hadn't just erased my access. They'd rewritten the narrative. And the worst part was, they thought no one would notice. My hand drifted to my old laptop, the one I kept separate from company systems. I opened it slowly, as if my muscles weren't convinced I had a right to touch any of this anymore. The screen blinked to life. I navigated to one of the systems I had built, Deepex Grid Management. Still live. Still in use by 5 city networks, including Dallas. 8 years ago, they'd said it was too ambitious, too niche, too expensive. I rewrote the entire risk assessment logic over a single weekend. That version was still running. I pulled up the diagnostic logs. Every process was firing smoothly. No one had touched the core module because no one dared. That module was written in Python 1.9, outdated by today's standards. But what they didn't know or had long forgotten was that I had embedded a navigation scaffold unique to my approach. It wasn't documented. It wasn't in any training manual. And without it, the system would crash the moment someone tried to modernize it with Damon's shiny little toolkits. I leaned back. The bitter taste in my mouth was sharp and rising. They had no idea what they were still standing on. It took me back to 2016. A $410 million contract with the city of Atlanta was minutes from collapsing due to a misaligned geodata packet. A single misrouted file could have exposed Aldrin to a lawsuit that might have taken the company under. That day, I was in an ambulance. My mother had collapsed from a stroke, and I was holding her hand, trying to stay calm while the sirens wailed. But my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. I opened my laptop on my knees, tethered it to my phone, and rewrote the spatial correction algorithm in 17 minutes. We delivered on time. The lawsuit vanished, and no one ever knew where that code was written. I never told them, never asked for praise. The board sent a thank you email. The CEO gave me a paperweight with a globe on it. And now, on the morning of my 50th birthday, I was retired by a man who didn't even know what a compiler warning meant. I stared at the watch again. Tick, tick, tick. Legacy weight, they called me, as if that was an insult. But what they didn't realize was that while they celebrated new dashboards and flashy analytics, the very systems keeping their lights on, their numbers up, their contracts moving, were mine. And unlike them, I never forget what I build. The morning after my birthday firing felt like waking up inside a snow globe. Familiar structures still in place, but everything oddly quiet, suspended. I hadn't slept. The email still sat in my inbox, like a wound that wouldn't close. Technically, no one had followed up. No final paperwork. No official statement. Just silence. So, against the knot in my stomach, I walked into Aldrin at 9:05 a.m. badge still active. Heart steady. Fury held in reserve. At 10 o'clock sharp, a meeting was scheduled on the 14th floor. Division realignment and efficiency strategies. Vague, but I wasn't naive. I walked in and immediately felt the shift. My usual seat, the front left corner of the oval table, was already occupied. I took a spot farther down, near the edge, where the coffee was lukewarm and no one met my eyes. And then he walked in. Damon Thorne, the new boy in the suit, 38, Harvard MBA, slicker than the floor wax, and entirely too competent for someone who'd only been here 3 months. He didn't glance around, didn't greet anyone. He simply slid into the chair at the head of the table, like it had always belonged to him. "Thanks for making time," he began, tapping his tablet with 2 fingers. "This is a new chapter, and I want to talk about velocity, visibility, and value alignment." The alliteration made me want to scream. He launched into a presentation full of charts and jargon. Streamline operations, sunset inefficiencies, legacy systems dragging performance. I stared at the screen, half listening, until he pulled up a heat map of system modules. One of them blinked red. "Here's a good example," he said, tapping the node labeled Deepex Grid Management. "It's high cost, hard to scale, and honestly dated. We're exploring replacements." I didn't flinch. I leaned forward. That platform processed $712 million in regional contracts last fiscal year. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Yes, but that's legacy momentum, not innovation." The room stilled. You could hear the HVAC buzzing overhead. And then came the line. "Honestly," Damon said, flipping to the next slide, "some of the issues we're seeing come down to legacy weight." He didn't look at me when he said it. He didn't need to. The room did. Heads turned subtly toward where I sat. I kept my face blank, my hand still, but inside, something cold cracked open. The meeting dragged another 20 minutes. More slides, more solutions to problems that didn't exist until Damon declared them so. When it finally ended, people filed out in silence. I waited until the room cleared before gathering my notes, though I hadn't written a thing. Back in my office, still mine apparently, I closed the blinds and opened my laptop. Not the company-issued one. Mine. The one I used for real work. I navigated to a hidden directory I'd kept for over a decade. Passive Records. Years ago, I had installed an automated backup audio recorder for internal ethics tracking. It captured all room mics during executive meetings as a protective audit measure. No one else knew it was still active. Today's file was already there. Audio _ 10-01 Damon Thorn. I clicked play. Some of the issues we're seeing come down to legacy weight. There it was. Crisp. Clear. No context to save him. I copied the file to a flash drive and labeled it legacy _ Thorn MP3. I didn't know yet what I'd do with it. Not today. But something told me this file would matter. Damon thought he was trimming fat. What he didn't realize was that some weight is structural. Some legacy holds the entire building up. After the meeting with Damon, I didn't go home. I couldn't. Not yet. I sat in the parking garage for nearly an hour, the hum of the overhead lights the only sound inside my car. My hands hovered over the keyboard of my personal laptop, resting on the center console. I wasn't checking email. I was checking code. Something in me, the same instinct that had carried me through 21 years of near catastrophes, was whispering that something was wrong. So I listened. I tunneled into Atlas, the contract orchestration platform I had architected from the ground up. I no longer had admin access, not since Damon restructured permissions for clarity, but the sandbox environment was still visible, and I still knew where the bones were buried. Atlas had layers, old foundations beneath sleek dashboards most people forgot about. Damon probably didn't even know they existed. I pulled the latest commit history for the Boston pre-signing flow, the core validation routine for our $2.3 billion deal with the city. My stomach tightened when I saw it. There, 6 days ago, a patch labeled Efficiency Enhancement, approved by D_Thorn, author, R. Barnes, junior developer. 6 months in, still shadowing. My eyes narrowed. Damon had greenlit a code change by someone barely familiar with the structure. And worse, someone with no institutional memory. I opened the diff view. It was all there in black and green. Lines of code meant to validate contract requirements had been trimmed. The logic was streamlined, yes, but dangerously so. They had removed a conditional branch used specifically for legacy government client IDs. IDs like 07411BOS, Boston's primary validation gateway. I checked the real-time diagnostics. Sure enough, a validation error was active on client IDZU 7411BOS. Status failed. Timestamp 4:03 p.m. The contract was now frozen in limbo. If it remained unvalidated for 48 hours, Boston had legal grounds to cancel that portion of the project. $270 million lost overnight. And Damon wouldn't even know why. I took a slow breath. There wasn't time to argue. No time to escalate. No time for warnings. I launched my terminal and began crafting a hotfix. Not to the production environment they'd trace that, but slipped into a shadow pathway I'd built back in Atlas version 1, when the team was just 5 engineers and trust was still sacred. I reintroduced the conditional logic as a hidden override protocol, wrapped in a fail-safe flag. No one else would notice. Comment tag, legacy override mode. I didn't sign the commit. I didn't even log the session. Just saved, staged, and watched. 10 minutes later, the red flag vanished. Status validated. 10:41 p.m. Yes. No alarms. No applause. The system simply resumed. Aldrin, still smug in its ignorance, never knew how close it had come to bleeding out. I leaned back in the driver's seat, the dim glow of my dashboard clock reflecting off the windshield. It was 11:15 p.m. The office windows above me were dark now. Everyone had gone home. Everyone but the ghost in the system. Because while Damon gave speeches and launched his modernization strategy, he never once stopped to ask who had built the infrastructure he was gutting. He didn't ask because he didn't think I mattered. Because to him, experience was dead weight. Legacy was just old code waiting to be deleted. But Atlas knew. Atlas remembered. A system doesn't respond to charm or slide decks. It responds to structure. And I was still its architect, whether they put my name on the roster or not. I closed the laptop gently, like laying a child back to sleep. I didn't smile. I didn't even feel vindicated. I just felt tired, quiet, watchful. They thought they'd shut me out, that I was gone. But I was still there. In the lines. In the logic. And as long as Atlas ran, I was still watching. The next morning, the office air felt thinner. Same desks, same people, but it was like someone had turned the temperature down without touching the thermostat. I walked in at 8:15 a.m., as I had for the past 2 decades. My key card still worked. My chair was still where I left it, but something had shifted, an absence I couldn't quite name. Conversations quieted when I passed. No one made eye contact. And for the first time in years, no one asked if I wanted coffee from the break room. I logged in. System access was still active. Atlas was running. All dashboards were green. The Boston contract code had stabilized overnight, thanks to the patch I had quietly applied for my car. They didn't know they'd almost lost $270 million in less than 48 hours. They didn't know because I didn't tell them. I didn't do it for them. I did it for the system, for the work. By 9 o'clock, meeting invites started rolling in for everyone else. I noticed a senior-level strategy session marked Boston Deployment Sync, internal leaders only. I wasn't invited. A younger engineer, Ravi, who had once shadowed me for 3 months, was listed as the host. I found him by the printers. He looked startled when he saw me. "Hey, Kenza," he stammered. "Damon asked me to lead today's sync. Said you were transitioning." "Transitioning?" I repeated slowly. "To what?" He paled. "I thought he told us you were retiring soon." "That's what everyone's saying." I didn't correct him. I didn't ask who everyone was. I just nodded once and walked away. Back at my desk, a small white box sat neatly on the corner. I hadn't left it there. Inside were 3 framed photos, a notepad I hadn't used in years, and my fountain pen, carefully placed as if someone had packed them on my behalf. No note, no name. The lights above my row were dimmed, and the motion sensor didn't turn them on. My part of the floor now felt like an afterthought, a shadow in the hallway. I passed 2 junior analysts, whispering near the vending machines. One said softly, "I thought she already left." The other replied, "They said she's still here, just not in charge anymore." I stepped into a quiet corner office and pulled up the internal HR portal. I typed my name, Kenza R.A., consultant, legacy systems, non-perm. Effective date, 2 weeks ago. My throat went dry. I scrolled up, then down. No memo. No HR email. No contract renegotiation. I checked the audit log. Damon had approved the title change himself, marked as structural streamlining. He hadn't told me. No one had. In their system, I was already gone. Not fired. Not promoted. Just quietly downgraded. Erased. Politely. I closed the window. There was nothing else to see. At 10:30 a.m., I passed by the conference room where the Boston Sync was taking place. I saw Ravi presenting to a team of people who used to report to me. The slide on the screen was one I had designed. I stood there for a moment, invisible. Not because they meant to exclude me, but because they had already rewritten the ending and I was no longer part of the story. Back at my desk, I didn't sit down. I opened my personal laptop, checked the Atlas logs. Everything was running. The patch I'd inserted was still intact. The system still knew who I was, even if the people didn't. I looked around at the dimmed row of desks, then at the little white box beside me. I didn't feel rage or betrayal. I felt something colder. Disappearance. They hadn't pushed me out with malice. They had just let me fade. One decision here. One whisper there. Until I wasn't needed. Until I wasn't seen. But I was still here. Still watching. Still inside the system. They had removed me quietly so I would answer them in silence. I opened the original Boston contract file with a kind of reverence. Not the polished dashboard version Damon paraded in meetings, but the real one. Line by line. Clause by clause. In the quiet hours no one remembers, but systems never forget. Just yesterday, I stood outside that glass-walled conference room, watching Ravi, barely 30, present my material like he'd written it. My name wasn't even on the draft he used. But deep inside Atlas, buried in the source protocol logs, the origin marker was still there. Document constructed RK initial build date, 11 months ago. Boston wasn't just another deal. It was the most complex, high-stakes government infrastructure contract Aldrin had ever seen. $2.3 billion to modernize energy grids across the state. And Aldrin wasn't the obvious winner. There were 3 major bidders. One had a lower price. Another had more lobbying power. We had one thing they didn't. The adaptive grid simulation architecture designed by me. They said it couldn't be done. I said it already was, and I proved it over 4 in-person visits, 6 secure architecture presentations, and 1 emergency data reconciliation I performed on a red-eye flight with a portable drive and no Wi-Fi. Boston's deputy commissioner once told me, "Most vendors give us polished PDFs. You brought us transparency." I hadn't forgotten that. And I hadn't forgotten how fragile trust becomes when filtered through too many layers of hierarchy. That's why when the contract neared final approval, I didn't just file it the usual way. I created a second version. A mirror. A shell. Same terms. Same delivery schedule. But this one lived inside a sandbox partition of Atlas, built with a validation lock that required my biometric signature. Retinal hash and fingerprint scan combined to fully activate. Why? Because I knew this company and I knew Damon. I had seen what optimization looked like when it passed through his hands. He didn't understand risk. He gift-wrapped it. The public-facing contract, the one everyone applauded, was a polished shell of its own, missing a key verification block required for final compliance in the state of Massachusetts. Without my signature, it was just paper. I didn't tell anyone. Not legal. Not ops. Not even the Boston officials. I simply built in the lock as a final safeguard. A quiet net beneath the high wire. Because sometimes the system needs to protect itself from its own handlers. And today, I was watching those handlers juggle champagne glasses over an empty void. Damon had no idea. He strutted across boardrooms and Zoom calls, taking victory laps for a deal he thought he owned. But he hadn't read the metadata. He hadn't traced the validation ledger. He didn't even know that the biometric registration log still listed me as the primary contract architect. I was no longer invited to meetings. My desk had been quietly boxed up, my title downgraded without notice. And yet here it was. My contract. My system. My signature. I closed the contract shell and opened the hashkey validator. It blinked red, inactive, awaiting biometric confirmation. Damon would never be able to activate it. And once the city's review portal flagged the lack of valid verification, the entire contract would collapse unless someone else stepped in. Someone with a working version. Someone the city already trusted. Someone whose system still bore her name, even if the building no longer did. I didn't smile. There was nothing theatrical about this moment. Just quiet pride that what I built still stood. That no matter how loudly they tried to erase me, the foundations whispered otherwise. The email subject line was loud enough to ring in my skull. We did it! All caps. No context. No name. The message below was short. Join us in the main auditorium at 11 a.m. to celebrate the successful signing of the Boston contract. Our biggest win yet. No mention of who led the system design. No acknowledgement of who wrote the validation protocol. No line, formal or casual, that said, "Thanks, Kenza." Still, I showed up. Not out of pride. Not out of hope. Out of curiosity. The kind that simmers beneath the surface when you've been publicly erased and privately necessary. The halls were buzzing, literally. Someone had ordered t-shirts with the phrase Boston 2.3 be delivered printed across the chest in bold navy font. Blue and white balloons tied to every door handle. A massive cake sat on the break room table, frosted with words I had to squint to believe. "Thank you, innovation team." Innovation. That word didn't sting anymore. It just rang hollow. The auditorium lights dimmed as I took a place in the back, standing behind the last row of chairs. I didn't sit. I didn't want to leave an impression that I belonged. Damon walked on stage like he was stepping into a spotlight made just for him. Black suit, slim tie, trademark smile. Behind him, a screen flashed the words "Boston secured." He raised both arms like a ringmaster. The crowd clapped without hesitation. "I want to thank everyone who helped make this deal a reality," he said, voice warm and practiced, especially the next-gen minds that showed what Aldrin's future truly looks like. He listed them by name: Ravi, Barnes, Megan. Everyone he'd elevated in the last 2 months. My name? Not once. Not in passing. Not as a footnote. But that wasn't the betrayal that hurt the most. It was what I saw on my screen while he spoke. On my tablet, tucked into my coat like a private window to the truth. I watched the contract status update from the City of Boston's secure portal. One line blinking red: status, validation pending. Awaiting biometric confirmation. Architect, KR. They hadn't signed anything. Not legally. Not technically. Not officially. A few minutes before the celebration began, I had received a forwarded email from a quiet friend in Boston's legal department. She didn't write much, just a subject line: still pending. Inside was the thread: "We're still awaiting final activation from your original architect. Until then, the contract is not legally binding." The timestamp was 10:37 a.m. I looked up as Damon raised a glass of champagne. "We did it," he repeated. "This contract will define Aldrin's legacy." Legacy. He said it like it was a trophy. He said it without irony. Below me, everyone was clapping, laughing, toasting with plastic flutes and cake. Above them, in the corner shadows of the balcony, I watched quietly, fingers brushing the biometric sensor built into my device. I could end this charade right now with a touch. But I didn't. I closed the tablet, the red light still blinking beneath the screen. Let it blink. Let it haunt them. Let them choke on cake while thinking they'd won. The truth was, they were celebrating a ghost. A file that had never been validated. A system they didn't understand. A signature only I could give. And I wouldn't. Not yet. As the music swelled and Damon stepped off stage to take photos, I turned and walked out. They had their spotlight, their applause, but I had the line that mattered, the one they couldn't rewrite, awaiting final activation from your original architect. They forgot who built the bridge, but they were about to find out what happens when the builder decides not to cross. I didn't remember the drive home. What I remembered was the sound of Damon's voice echoing through the auditorium, the words "we did it" ringing like a lie told too often and too easily. I remembered the applause, the glittering smugness on his face, the way no one looked up to question it. I remembered the cake, the shirts, the noise. But now, as I sat in the stillness of my apartment, the only sound was the soft click of my laptop waking from sleep. No champagne. No crowd. Just code. I logged into my sandbox environment, a mirrored instance of Atlas I had preserved for myself long ago. Not out of paranoia, out of necessity. If you build a system meant to control billions of dollars, You don't just walk away from it unarmed. The interface loaded slowly, as if reluctant to reveal what I already knew. Contract ID. BOS 2301. Status. Validation pending. Architect of record. KR biometric signature. Not registered. Still pending. Still inactive. Still mine. I shifted in my chair, jaw locked. The same system Damon had paraded around as a closed deal, the one he toasted with his next-gen innovation team, was still hanging in limbo. Because, while he played CEO in waiting with investor emails and victory speeches, he never bothered to check whether the engine was running beneath the hood. He didn't even know where the key was. And I had it. I opened the metadata block tied to the validation script. My cursor hovered over a single field I hadn't touched in 11 months. Secure activation window. 72 hours. Start time. Monday 8:51 a.m. I glanced at the clock. Tuesday 8:51 a.m. That meant we were officially 24 hours in. 48 hours remained. The system would auto-trigger a shutdown of the shell, a clause I had added, buried 3 layers deep in the sandbox architecture. If biometric activation wasn't completed by the 72nd hour, the contract would automatically be flagged as void due to incompletion. Not delayed. Not paused. Void. And under Massachusetts procurement law, once a contract becomes legally invalidated, the state has full authority to award it to the next qualifying vendor. No rebidding required. That door would open wide, and the first company in line would be Strategian. I didn't smile. This wasn't the climax of some plan for revenge. It was the slow, creaking consequence of arrogance. The final echo of every ignored warning, every erased name, every missing credit. They thought the signature was a formality. They thought the system ran on autopilot, but the system knew better. The system had always known me. I toggled to a separate interface, a personal monitoring tool I had built when I started crafting the shell, just in case. On the lower right-hand corner, a countdown appeared in white text against a black background. Activation required. 47 hours, 59 minutes, and 12 seconds remaining. Each second flicked down like a drop of water falling into a metal bowl. I sat back, staring at the screen, feeling that old heat rise in my chest. But I didn't scream, didn't punch anything, didn't type a single threatening word. That would have been too easy, too loud. I remembered how they never told me I was no longer a director, how they boxed my desk without a word, how they rewrote my role in the system without a single notification. And now they would learn how silence works both ways, because I wasn't going to warn them. I wasn't going to remind anyone of the timeout clause. I wasn't going to answer their calls when things started failing to upload, or when the city's legal department started asking why no biometric validation had arrived. I was going to let the timer run. At 47 hours and 59 minutes, I was still invisible to them. But in 48 hours, they would watch $2.3 billion vanish in front of them, and they would realize too late that the deal was never theirs to celebrate, because it had never left my hands. I didn't call to ask for help. I called to activate a pact. 9:15 a.m. The glass on my desk still shimmered with condensation from untouched tea. I sat alone in the condo study, Atlas's dormant interface blinking quietly on my secondary screen. On the primary, a simple number sat in silence. Julian Wells, CEO of Strategian. The one man Damon feared but never understood. I pressed call. No hesitation. Just precision. KR. His voice came, sharp. Alert. Been a while. 47 hours, 59 minutes, and 12 seconds, I replied. That's how long they have left before the shell expires. A pause, then a breath that was almost laughter. So, it's happening. Yes, I said. And I'm ready to move it. Julian wasn't just a rival. 20 years ago, when we were both nothing more than graduate researchers at Greybridge Labs, we built the skeletal code for what would become Atlas. Back then, he chose anonymity. I chose endurance. We shook hands on one thing before he left for New York. We never let justice sleep. The world forgot that handshake. We didn't. I forwarded the encrypted shell key to his inbox. As it transmitted, my pulse remained steady. No anger. No doubt. Just cold, methodical control. What they once called a flaw in my leadership style. I'll have the city's legal review team looped in by 10, Julian said. They trust me, but they trust your architecture more. It's still Aldrin's, I reminded him. No activation until I see the signature protocol verified. You have the blueprint. He did. I built it to be recognized only by 2 biometric identifiers, my left index fingerprint and the subdermal token embedded in my collarbone, issued under federal contractor classification 7 years ago. It had never been logged in Aldrin's public documentation. That was the point. Julian, I added, this isn't just a transfer. It's a reset. You take it, but you do it right. With integrity. I wouldn't touch it otherwise, he said. Damon's press release just hit the wire, by the way. He's calling it the first trillion-dollar decade move. I let silence answer that, because I had already sent the legal block notice to Boston's procurement team. They would receive confirmation within the hour that the original architect, me, had withdrawn approval due to breach of equity protections. Technically, they hadn't breached it, but removing me at 8:46 a.m. without full board review alone left enough room for my withdrawal clause to stand. Julian understood it better than anyone. This will burn, he warned. Quieter now. Publicly. I'm counting on it, I said. I leaned back as the call ended, staring at the old photo still framed on the bookshelf. My daughter, age 12, wearing my badge, lanyard, and laughing in the mirror. That day, she told me, they won't see your name until you walk away. Now I was walking, but I wasn't walking empty-handed. By 10:06 a.m., Julian's legal counsel submitted the activation petition to Boston. Unlike Aldrin, Strategian had done its internal homework. Within 10 minutes, the city's digital ledger updated the engagement record. Contract NTSX 94 as transferred, awaiting final biometric approval. Mine. I looked at the approval window, ticking down. 46 hours, 22 minutes and counting. I didn't flinch. I didn't cry. I clicked Enable Final Linkage. And in that moment, I rewrote their future with nothing but my fingertip. 9:23 a.m. I was already on the road when the first alert came through. Aldrin's internal Slack was buzzing like a hornet's nest. A leak had hit the wire. Boston City contract under review. I pulled over, heart steady, eyes scanning for the next ripple. I'd expected this. In the glass tower I'd once called mine, Damon Thorne stormed out of the executive suite. He'd called an emergency all-hands with the legal and compliance teams, shouting across the hallway that someone had tampered with the final submission. They all turned to him, confused. You clicked submit, Damon. We saw you, someone whispered. By 9:31 a.m., Aldrin's CFO, Letitia Vaughn, had called PR and ordered a full stop on the press release. I heard she even unplugged the teleprompter from the podium. Cameras had already been set, flags in place, but the launch wasn't happening. The stock, our stock, dipped 5 points in under 6 minutes. I watched it like I'd once watched my daughter's fever drop, slowly, decisively after a long night. There was something surgical about it, precise, irreversible. What Damon didn't know, what he couldn't have known, was that the file he submitted wasn't the final build. It wasn't even legally binding. It was the test version, a mirror file, one that lacked the biometric seal and the encryption hash only I could generate. I'd left it in the shared folder on purpose, the version labeled Final Contract _3_test. He never asked. He never verified. By 9:42 a.m., Strategian's legal division filed a formal request with Boston's municipal office to reopen the bidding window. They submitted the full verification trail, My signature, the activation timestamp, the clause lock parameters, only I could authorize. Every piece was time-stamped, clean, and aligned with protocol. Back at Aldrin Tech, the panic spread like fire. Damon tried to recall the contract, but was locked out of the audit trail. He demanded the tech team verify the hash, only to be told the version had never passed biometric validation. The submission was void, irrecoverable. I imagined his voice breaking in that moment, not because he understood the system, but because he finally understood that I had been the system. He called a private meeting in the top-floor boardroom. They called it the panic room now. Full glass walls, once meant for client demos and closing handshakes. But that day, the transparency turned on him. From the sidewalk, reporters could see the pacing, the yelling, the head-in-hand spiral as executives crowded the room with nowhere to hide. And I drove past slowly. I didn't stop. I didn't smile. But I saw him. Palms on the glass, mouthing something I didn't need to hear to understand. The same man who'd once smirked and called me legacy weight, now staring at the collapse he triggered with a single, unchecked click. He had lost it all, and still didn't know how. I had warned them for months, through detailed memos, risk assessments, late-night reviews, but they were too eager to move on from the woman who built the system, too eager to own what they had never created, too eager to erase. By 9:51 a.m., I reached the underground garage of Strategian. A security guard met me at the entrance with a badge already printed. It bore my name, my photo, my title, Chief Executive Officer. I held the card in my hand for a moment, watching the silver reflect the morning sun. It wasn't revenge. Not really. It was validation. For the first time in 21 years, I didn't feel like a ghost in someone else's building. They had fired me for turning 50, but I was still the architect of every system they ran. And Damon? He had submitted a ghost and built his empire on sand. The first email came in at 8:31 a.m. Subject: Appointment confirmation. Chief Executive Officer, Strategian. I didn't move. Just stared at the subject line the way someone might look at a letter from the past they never thought would resurface. I clicked it open. Julian's tone was formal, but the last line undid me. This title was always yours. Welcome home. No press conference. No balloons. No eyes on me. Just the soft hum of the new office I hadn't even set up yet. I folded the letter and slipped it into the inside pocket of my blazer. My name was back, but more than that, my authorship had never left. By 9:05 a.m., the city of Boston issued its new press release. Aldrin's contractual submission has been declared invalid. In accordance with regulatory protocols, the project will be awarded to Strategian Corporation, effective immediately. That sentence might have devastated someone else. For me, it just confirmed what I already knew. Truth eventually resurfaces, and this time, it carried my digital fingerprint on every line of code. I downloaded the official documentation package from the city site. Every document, every clause, every contract page bore one line near the footer. Contract originator, Kenza R.A., and beneath that embedded via watermark, verified under U.S. Biometric IP Act. Do not alter. That was no accident. Sometime around 9:32 a.m., a junior staffer from Aldrin Tech leaked a 37-second internal meeting clip. I got it forwarded anonymously from a former colleague. The volume didn't matter. Damon's rage needed no audio boost. He slammed his palm on the table, shouting, "Why the hell is her name on the contract? Why is it tied to her?" Someone off-frame mumbled about signature locks and legal shells. Damon's face twisted, not in anger this time, but confusion, as if all this time he truly believed I was just a name in the past, a file to be archived, a legacy weight. But I had built the weight into the system itself. I closed the video. No smirk, no tears, just quiet, as if the system had balanced itself. My phone buzzed at 10 a.m. Strategian's general counsel sent over the latest contract. This time signed by the city, verified by our team, activated by my biometric confirmation. Not a single field was missing, and on every page my name, but this time not buried in paragraph 9, not hidden in metadata. No, bold header, licensed by Kenza RA, contract originator. That watermark, immutable, uneditable, would stay there forever. I walked to the window. Below, the city pulsed with traffic, unaware of the shift that had just taken place. On the lobby TV screen downstairs, a news anchor announced, Boston's $2.3 billion project shifts to new tech leader. My name wasn't spoken aloud, but in the article crawl beneath I caught it. Built on the legacy architecture of its original designer, KR. I didn't need anything more. As I turned back to the room, my new assistant knocked gently. Ms. RA? The strategy team's waiting in the West conference room. Shall I walk you in? I nodded, then paused. I wasn't just walking into a room anymore. I was walking into my name. For years, I thought silence was the absence of noise. But this silence, this quiet after the storm, felt full. It held every overlooked contribution, every late-night refining atlas while others celebrated, every time I bit my tongue in meetings where others echoed my ideas louder. It held the ache of birthdays missed, of my daughter waiting with a card while I joined client calls. And it held something else. Justice, maybe, or overdue recognition. I sat at the desk. Not Damon's. Not anyone's passed-down power. Mine. I opened the strategy file not to redo it, but to expand. There was still work to be done. But now every decision, every line of code, every choice would begin with my name, not end with it. I wasn't chasing credit anymore. I was writing the blueprint others would follow for decades. Let them whisper. I had already quietly written myself back into the story. I stepped through the glass doors of Strategian headquarters just after 8 a.m., a full week after the contract collapse. The lobby was quiet, sunlight casting long streaks across the floor like ribbons of clarity. No press, no parade, just polished silence. And me. I wasn't here to celebrate. I was here to begin. The elevator opened on the executive floor with a muted chime. When I stepped out, it wasn't the corner office that pulled my breath. It was the stillness, the knowledge that every decision going forward bore my name. Inside, the space was bare, minimal. One long desk, one laptop, one view of the skyline, no family photos, no corporate plaques, just one thing in the small leather case I carried under my arm. I opened it. Inside lay the medal I once received from Aldrin Tech. Outstanding Contributor, 2006. I hadn't seen it in over a decade. Below it, I pinned a new plaque. It wasn't for others. It was for me. 50 is not the end. It's the ignition. I stood there reading those words in silence. Not pride, not revenge. Just quiet acknowledgement that I was never finished. Only paused. When I logged into my inbox, the first message read, Subject, following you wherever you go. Then another, and another. 12 emails from former colleagues, most from engineers I once mentored. Some from junior staff who had once ignored me after the rumors of retirement spread. Each note held the same thread. Regret, respect, and hope. Please let me work with you again. I'm tired of pretending Aldrin has a vision. If there's room for someone who still believes, I'm ready. Even one from Marcus, the engineer Damon had replaced me with. I was wrong. I knew it the day they changed your title without telling you. If there's a place for me, I'd earn it this time. I didn't reply right away, but I saved every message. Names mattered now. Later that morning, I opened a browser window and typed 5 words into the Strategian internal launch board. Legacy Builder Scholarship Draft. It wasn't just a scholarship. It was a seed. The description read, For those told they're too old to innovate. For those who weren't done. Open to engineers over 45 with unfinished ideas and no permission needed to start again. The memories came rushing in. Being told at 47 I was aging out of vision roles, watching my projects handed to younger men with louder voices. I remembered the numbness, not of losing position, but of being silently erased. This program wouldn't erase anyone. A junior assistant poked her head in, eyes wide. "They confirmed it," she said breathlessly. "The Boston board chose Strategian for Phase 2, and they asked for you by name." I nodded once. "Prepare the transition team." When she left, I rose and walked down the corridor, past rooms filled with energy I hadn't felt in years. I passed a whiteboard where a group of developers debated timestamp efficiency, part of my old Atlas syntax, still visible in the corner. I didn't interrupt. I simply smiled. Back in my office, I placed one last photo beneath the plaque. A younger me, holding my daughter in front of the first Atlas prototype. My face in the picture wore exhaustion and pride. Today I wore neither. Just clarity. I poured tea into the old ceramic mug I'd kept since my early engineering days. Then I opened a clean slate on my screen. A blank terminal. A blinking cursor. A quiet breath. I wasn't replacing anything. I was beginning again. Outside, the sky had shifted. Brighter now. Not because the clouds had parted, but because something within me had. I thought about the nights I spent rewriting architecture blueprints no one would ever credit me for. The late Friday calls. The last-minute patches before launch. The systems that held up millions of people's lives, all written in silence. But no longer. I turned my chair slightly toward the window. The city was still moving, unaware of the changes unfolding from this floor. Somewhere below, a young developer might be doubting their worth. Their timeline. Their voice. One day, maybe they'd apply for Legacy Builder. And maybe I'd be the one reading their name. Maybe they'd be nothing like me. Better. That was the point. The cursor blinked again.